I am now going to take you on a little bit of a historical trip. Okay, because Roger was just introducing stuff about how he himself in the here and now, as he was presenting, could try and be real, but not in the way that we would be if it was not overtly, let's call it pro-homo, okay? Because he's a homo, okay? So unless he says that and owns that overtly and is in it in the moment, not just with the thought of it, but the feeling of it, he's somehow being insincere to himself or insulting to his own person, or here's even more so implied, that the person as homosexual deserves the respect and due that is so for all human existence. And that can be felt inside. It doesn't have to be taught from an external source. But how important it is then to support being able to discover that, being able to appreciate that, being able to feel that in oneself and then from vis-a-vis one to another too, as well, because we don't live as islands unto ourselves as well. So since I cannot speak for times and places before my own life, pretty much, or outside my own cognizance, I don't know what it might have been like in other times and places than the one I grew up in and live in now, in the kind of terms that are common to us now, like homosexual versus heterosexual, or non-homosexual, or hetero, if any of you have read any of the stuff on this. Debate about is there essences, is it constructed, is it socially caused, and therefore related to issues of power and structures of power. And these questions and debates have gone on for a long time, and they're still going on now. And where one finds oneself, I discovered for myself, was through my own experience. And ultimately, everyone has their own experience. You'll have your own experience. So I want to share a time and place when, and I've been with my own experience since I was born, and everyone is like that. But I want to share a time and place of my own experience when I was beginning to grapple more overtly with calling what I was experiencing being concerned with being homosexual, overtly homosexual. And I don't mean coming out. I'd already been out in that sense and, quote, integrated, unquote, in that way for some years. Though I fought it earlier, and I'd been in my teens, I was horrified, actually, to discover that I was homosexually interested. And when I first went to therapy, it was to get cured. And I wanted to be cured of it. And I thought that was the way to be a proper adult human being, was to minimize it. If I couldn't get rid of these erotic genital interests that were not about what so-called society approved of or said was normal or regular, that was not what I was experiencing at all. And though I wished otherwise, mightily and bravely, and I wished it every night, drenched in guilt and shame for every night for a long time, the gonadal interests wouldn't go away of their own accord, and they remained same-sex interested. There was something very fascinating about the sexuality of beings, but in a way it wasn't going to be pleasing to my Patty mommy. She wasn't going to like to hear about that, nor my potential grandchildren. They were going to be very displeased, and my grandchildren especially. And I had many grandchildren and pleased my mother and my father very much. And it was a great dilemma for me to, like my little baby gonads did, were not interested in that. and I'm sure you're all familiar. I grew up in the beginning in the 50s and 1950s here, and so right near here actually. And it was, if you were of this persuasion in your genital interest, or were to become that, fated to become that way, it was a rough and difficult time. It was a time in which anything of a same-sex interested nature simply didn't exist at all. They were still carrying it on in the 1950s. This, it's called what's called the crime against Christians you don't even name. It was in Latin. You don't even say it in English. This goes back to hundreds of years that this was so. So you didn't even talk about it. This was still going on in the 50s. I was born in 1951. like this. So, to come from that kind of background, and that's the only way you could handle if you weren't of the appropriate type of orientational being or desires of being, and you couldn't make yourself be like that, and you could, worse, you couldn't fake it. Many had faked it. One couldn't do that either. I grew up then, really, more in the 60s, if I'm coming of age. And I had big trouble if I'm trying to be more hippie-ish, let's call it at the time, more authentic to myself, because I wasn't interested in being leftist, so much as hippie-ish, let me call it. How did I integrate that with the fact that I was homo? And this was, even in hippie world, this was much more tolerant world, but you couldn't be pro-homo. Which I'm saying, if you're not pro-homo, you're automatically anti. There's no such thing as, I don't know about this, or I'm not aware of this. I didn't realize it myself. I was thus, you see, full of homophobia, internalized homophobic attitudes, as everyone always is. It's hard. It's a rough business to integrate this stuff in a much more upfront way than normally we take for granted. So, but nonetheless, even though I fought it really hard, I went to my first therapist when I was 18 years old, trying to pay for my own damn money, paying $30 a week. It was a lot of money in 1969. To try and cure myself and try and be able to have, quote, normal, quote, unquote, desire like everyone else. It didn't work. And in fact, not only did it not work, it strengthened my curiosity about, well, what was the alternative, which was to not oppose my feelings and my interests and my experiences anymore, the way I was doing so far. And that led me to take up a whole other attitude to it. And thus I had to come out. Thus, I was always, as even a young adult, synonymous with being a political activist and a political organizer. I was that way when I was a sophomore, already heavily involved in college with political activism. I'd been introduced to activism when I was 13, 14 years old, but I won't get, it's another story. But again, it's as if everyone's assumed to be straight, but you don't talk about it. So it's not an issue unless you bring it up, so everyone else will finger you as you're demonic somehow if you bring this up. So you can't talk, it's hard to express if you haven't grown up in a world where it's forbidden to speak pro-homo. And it's so alien and so strange and so weird, it's not even thought about. So I discovered that not only was it good to come out of the closet and accept myself, I started to accept my feelings, that they start to speak. And they started to say that they were important in their own right. Something I hadn't considered, and even being willing to accept what my impulses were about, rather than oppose or judge what my impulses were trying to tell me. They still were interested in trying to communicate meaningfulness, I might call it, but meaningfulness from their point of view, not from the culture's point of view, what I expected, or my religious upbringing's point of view, or what my parents' or my mother's point of view was, or what I thought it should have been the point of view. It was not any of those things. And it led me on a journey, and it's the journey that I've documented in writings over years that reference this journey. And this is called On the Road to a Gay-Centered Psychology, and it's referencing the writings that I've written that got published here or there, that I would call gay political writings. They're about being gay, but they're concerned within the political sense. How it gets out in the political sense, though, it might sound more, I don't know, aesthetic or spiritual or cultural to you than overtly political, isn't using political terms or words overtly. But it's about that kind of series, and I started it off with my first book called Men Loving Men, which is very, relatively speaking, popular since it was not done by a major press at all. It was the first book done by an obscure gay press, Gay Sunshine Books. It's their first book. They'd done some chapbooks and other small things that otherwise were known for a monthly news magazine, I guess we call it now, called Gay Sunshine, which is long ago. This is long ago now. all this was developing, and all this unfolded. And it might seem odd now to get into it, okay, because you can either read all these things, or it's all dead and gone. Who gives a fuck? So this is why it's of interest once a month to do a public event where, in this case, eventually, hopefully, we'll have other things to do as well of interest. But right now, so the old fogey like me can get up here in front of the camera in a public space and explain to whoever comes, no one has to come. It's not about that. It's for the world, or for the world of history, or for the world of possibility, or if there might be interest or not in it. Otherwise, it's entirely forgotten. It's stuff that's not actually the literal words themselves in a book. You can go to the book, you can go to the literal words to get that. It's what's between the words, what's the context of the words, that's going to only become dust. So, it's not as if we're sitting here with someone who's obviously accorded some great acclaim, in terms of something they might have written that you might read later on as to whether or not it's of significance or meaningfulness. But otherwise, once there is only the text itself, the rest is dust. If I'm dead, and if everyone who knew me is personally dead, and everyone who knew them, let's go a little further out in time. This time is inexorable, if you haven't noticed. It keeps inexorably going further out, okay, into itself, into what we call time. That pretty soon it's all dust, it's all forgotten, it's all as if it never existed. And so much of that has already been the case. It may be hard for us to appreciate right now how much suffering there's been in the world. But around this particular topic, for those of you who are not overtly, directly familiar with it, even though it might seem like no big deal that I or Roger might be up here talking about homosexual value, what we might call here and now homosexual value, is actually hard won possibility to even talk about it, get into it more in a public space. Even for me personally, it was not easy. I was not born to be able to appreciate what I was feeling, or what it meant to be a person. Only the possibilities, which I then had to meet and struggle with. So I want to share with you how it was that I came to a place that was beyond just what we might call gay affirmative, that is supportive of being gay. That's because, as I explained to you, I was interested in being gay affirmative rather than being anti-gay. So first I was anti-gay, even though my natural feelings were not anti-gay. I was really opposed to it, and I tried to be straight, and I tried to clean myself up, and I tried to cure myself, and I spent a lot of money, a lot of time at it, and it didn't work. So I could get the message. It wasn't that hard of a message to get. So it was to be, I should support what I was actually feeling, not oppose it. Like many around me, that's what I was trying to do. It was not uncommon to try and do that in the early 1970s. Because up until that point, there had only been anti-homosexual atmosphere around one. It only began to change because individuals were beginning to feel into another possibility of how they carried their own feelings about it. Because they'd be confronted with it and their own desires. Their own feelings about their own desires. So I did that as sincerely as I could, as I shared before. So I think it was the first of the series, which is about the book Men Loving Men. I shared with you how I came under the spell of Dr. Don Clark, the first self-proclaimed homosexual psychologist ever. He's probably best known for his 1977 book. Loving Someone Gay. It's gone through several reprints. He would have these workshops every weekend, about 3 days long, once a weekend, every couple of months or so for about 3-4 years in a row, every other month. So when I first got exposed to him, he was the first man I ever met who was not, quote, neutral, unquote, or overtly anti-gay.